Hey everybody, I'm Tim Mooney. If you're a student of history or oratory, or you just want to understand them a little better, you'll want to stick around to hear how you can finally get The Great Speeches, Part 2. Today I'm working my play, The Greatest Speech of All Time, back up into performance shape, and that gives me a chance to think about some of the amazing speeches that I originally chose for this play. I'll be performing this show this Sunday and Monday, August 9th and 10th, on Facebook and Zoom respectively, and then again on October 11th and 12th, 2020. While I will be getting into questions of rhetoric in future episodes, today I'm going to finish off looking at the specific speeches that I perform in my play, just to discuss what made these speeches appeal to me. The last time around, we looked at speeches by Socrates, Mark Antony, Frederick Douglass, Abraham Lincoln, and Emma Goldman. Today, we're zooming through Teddy and Franklin Roosevelt, Winston Churchill, Dwight Eisenhower, and Martin Luther King. So here we go with, I finally get The Great Speeches. I stumbled across a list of a Teddy Roosevelt speech that read, Speech After Having Been Shot. Reading it, I knew right away this was the one that I wanted to do, if only because it would be comic relief from some of the very heavy speeches that I was already doing. Yes, speech after having been shot is the comic relief, which may tell you something about my sense of humor. Teddy had let go of the presidency 4 years prior to this 1912 speech, but was now back, running for president again, upset over just how badly William Taft had handled the presidency in his absence. But the magic in this speech stems almost entirely from the fact that Roosevelt had been shot about 5 minutes prior to giving it. Teddy insists again and again that the issues at stake in this campaign are more important than his own life. Of course, our instinct is to shout back at him that he can come back to argue all of these issues another day if he would only go off to the hospital. Making a quick self-diagnosis, Teddy could tell that the bullet had not penetrated the lungs, and as a pugnacious, flamboyant politician, he also knew that the very fact that he gave this speech would give him front-page headlines everywhere. But Teddy had no way of knowing that he would be shot, which meant that every reference to the shooting that found its way into the speech was entirely improvised. And amid that improvisation, he puts his finger on a timeless moral dilemma. Now, friends, of course, I do not know, as I say, anything about him, the shooter. But it is a very natural thing that weak and vicious minds should be inflamed to acts of violence by the kind of awful mendacity and abuse that have been heaped upon me for the last 3 months by the papers in the interest of not only Mr. Debs, but of Mr. Wilson and Mr. Taft. While we may have free speech, our speech does not travel only into the ears of those who share an assumed agreement of polite debate. The psychologically disturbed often take inflammatory language as a green light to violent action, whether it be the deranged murderer who heard Bill O'Reilly repeating "Tiller the baby killer" 24 times on his national program, or Donald Trump calling the press the enemy of the people again and again and again, to which a wannabe killer responded by distributing pipe bombs. Again, despite his injury, Teddy hits this exactly on the head, describing how people with weak and vicious minds will take to those words of mendacity and abuse and respond with violence. Franklin Roosevelt, Teddy's distant cousin, took over as president in the middle of the Great Depression with unemployment at 25%. The economy is teetering, steeped in malaise, with little sense of how they are going to hang on to their homes and continue to feed their families. Roosevelt attacks that sense that things will not get better for America, knowing that this lack of confidence poses an ever greater danger to the country's recovery. Roosevelt reframes their focus less than 1 minute into the speech with what was to become the speech's most famous line. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Roosevelt explains that however bad the state of the economy is not actually a thing of substance. The economy is an artificial construct that we have invented to regulate and standardize trade. He reminds us, nature still offers her bounty, and human efforts have multiplied it. Those things are still out there, growing in the fields, and the challenge is to connect those things with the people who need them. Roosevelt effectively turns over the game board, revealing that this struggle for money was only a game in the first place. He does it by changing the terms of the game. Happiness lies not in the mere possession of money. It lies in the joy of achievement, in the thrill of creative effort. Money is an artificial construct, a currency that we have elevated to represent all-encompassing happiness. Of course, this might have been just empty, happy talk, were it not for the fact that Roosevelt goes on to detail just how the U.S. can make this looming money issue less relevant, halting foreclosures, engaging in coordinated relief efforts, pooling utilities, and especially disempowering the banking industry. In one of the most famous lines of this speech, "There must be a strict supervision of all banking and credits and investments. There must be an end to speculation with other people's money." And again, we hear a line out of the past that resonates with us today. The crash of 2008 was the result of Wall Street speculators packaging and repackaging junk mortgages and pretending that they were worth far more than they were. Every time we hit a new depression or recession, I wish that some American president might have the wherewithal to bring this speech back out and deliver it again. I believe Winston Churchill's "Their Finest Hour" was influenced by Shakespeare's St. Crispin's Day speech from Henry V. Both Henry V and Winston Churchill are facing a painful battle through which many lives will be lost. Both men need their listeners not only to struggle to survive the battle, but to envision victory. Both men reach into the imagination of the listeners, getting them to envision what life will be like for the survivors of the battle. Assuming that the nation should survive, well, then those who made that survival possible will be great heroes for many years, perhaps 1,000 years into the future. Speaking on St. Crispin's Day, Shakespeare's Henry V says, "Then shall our names, familiar in his mouth as household words, Harry the King, Bedford and Exeter, Warwick and Talbot, Salisbury and Gloucester, be in their flowing cups freshly remembered. This story shall the good man teach his son, and Crispin Crispian shall ne'er go by, from this day to the ending of the world. But we in it shall be remembered. We few, we happy few." Henry has beamed ahead into the future, one in which any wounds received in the course of the St. Crispin's Day battle will earn him respect and honor, largely because their numbers were so few and the odds were stacked so high against them. For that, then, might not the immediate travail that they will encounter along the way be worth the struggle. Churchill, a fan of Shakespeare, follows in Henry's footsteps by looking 1,000 years into the future. "Let us therefore brace ourselves to our duties, and so bear ourselves that if the British Empire and its Commonwealth last for 1,000 years, men will still say, this was their finest hour." None of us can hope to live 1,000 years, and likewise, the odds of being remembered 1,000 years down the line are at best 1,000,000 to 1. But might it be worth the loss to earn a reputation that will echo down throughout the ages? I am sure that Churchill deliberately borrowed this rhetorical twist from Shakespeare. While Dwight Eisenhower first called this speech the chance for peace, it is now widely known for its most famous phrase as the Cross of Iron speech. Dwight D. Eisenhower had been a general during the Second World War and witnessed the destructive power of the military-industrial complex firsthand. Survivors of war tend to be much more wary of the pain and destruction that it brings than those who argue on behalf of war without ever serving in it themselves, colloquially known as chicken hawks. Eisenhower makes the same point that Emma Goldman made almost 50 years prior a point we might still make today. The very industry of munitions, spending money to build things that will take lives and tear communities apart, is stealing from the people it is meant to serve. Eisenhower says, "Every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired signifies, in the final sense, a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, those who are cold and are not clothed. This world in arms is not spending money alone. It is spending the sweat of its laborers, the genius of its scientists, the hopes of its children." Eisenhower enumerates the many things that could be afforded if we weren't spending all of that money on armaments, schools, power plants, hospitals, food, housing, and he drives home that point in a way which would resonate especially with those of the Christian faith in this 1950s audience. This is not a way of life at all. Under the cloud of threatening war, it is humanity hanging from a cross of iron. Probably don't need to explain the power of that statement, but in one eloquent phrasing, Eisenhower has connected the martyrdom of Christ to a kind of mass martyrdom of a world addicted to its weapon systems. Knowing already that Martin Luther King died the following day, we better appreciate the hovering presence of the life and death atmosphere that pervades "I have been to the mountaintop." I also think that Dr. King had a suspicion that he didn't have very long left in light of now documented threats he had been receiving. But upon reading it, I was surprised to discover that he starts the speech tracing his way through the great arc of justice, touching on ancient Greece, the Roman Empire, the Renaissance, Lincoln's signing of the Emancipation Proclamation, and even FDR's Fear Itself speech, actually going so far as to quote that speech. Martin Luther King was working through those several moments of history that I had just explored in the speeches leading up to this scene. Those great historical moments were repeated or alluded to in a tight microcosm. King looks backwards as a prologue to the brilliant, spiraling rhetoric which would give us a rousing vision of the future, even in anticipation of his own death. Amid many, many great lines in this speech, here's the one that stands out the most for me. Just as King is about to segue into the tale that would lead to the speech's climax, he notes somewhat quietly, "Let us develop a kind of dangerous unselfishness." That sums up King's legacy and the real paradox of our ability to progress as a species. If we are willing to be unselfish as a community, if I protest on your behalf when you are oppressed, or if you are willing to do the same for me, then we as a community grow the moral standard of the world around us. Dangerous unselfishness may be the thematic equivalent of what the now late John Lewis would call good trouble. I Have Been to the Mountaintop almost invariably stands out as the audience favorite. This life and death speech expresses a kind of ironic transcendence. We know, retrospectively, better than the speaker does, just how much was at stake in this moment, and that knowledge makes this speech all that much more prophetic and precious. So that's my take on the great speeches. Next time, I expect we'll take a deeper look at the rhetoric that runs through these speeches and other common themes that arise in most or all of these. Please come join me for this week's performance of The Greatest Speech of All Time, Sunday night, August 9th on Facebook, and Monday night, August 10th, 2020 on Zoom. Or again, October 11th and 12th, 2020. All shows are at 9 o'clock Central Time. You'll want to click here for more of these explainer videos, or maybe somewhere around here sometime for a taste of these great speeches. This is just one of 8 one-man plays that I'm doing on a weekly basis over the course of 8-week cycles. Please drop by my website at timmooney.com to see what we've got coming up in future weeks. If you're watching this video after our 2020 performances, you'll want to check there for what we've got coming up next. Again, we're the Timothy Mooney Repertory Theater. Our goal is to inspire, inform, enlighten, educate, and entertain. If you're interested in helping us with that, any donations are deductible to the fullest extent allowable by law, and our Patreon campaign has some fun books, coffee mugs, t-shirts, and more available. You'll want to check that out too. See you on the stage.